Afrikaans is a West Germanic language spoken in South Africa, Namibia, and to a lesser extent, Botswana and Zimbabwe. It evolved from the Dutch vernacular of South Holland spoken by the mainly Dutch settlers of what is now South Africa, where it gradually began to develop distinguishing characteristics in the course of the 18th century. Hence, it is a daughter language of Dutch, and was previously referred to as Cape Dutch or Kitchen Dutch. The term is ultimately derived from Dutch Afrikaans-Hollands, meaning African Dutch. It is the first language of most of the Afrikaner and colored people of southern Africa, although Afrikaans has adopted words from other languages, including Portuguese, the Bantu languages, Malay, German and the Khoisan languages. An estimated 90 to 95% of Afrikaans vocabulary is of Dutch origin. Therefore, differences with Dutch often lie in the more analytic morphology and grammar of Afrikaans, and a spelling that expresses Afrikaans pronunciation rather than Standard Dutch. There is a large degree of mutual intelligibility between the two languages, especially in written form. With about 7 million native speakers in South Africa, or 13.5% of the population, it is the third most spoken language in the country. It has the widest geographical and racial distribution of all the 11 official languages of South Africa, and is widely spoken and understood as a second or third language. It is the majority language of the western half of South Africa, the provinces of the Northern Cape and Western Cape, and the first language of 75.8% of colored South Africans, 60.8% of white South Africans, and at 4.6% the second most spoken first language among Asian South Africans. About 1.5% of black South Africans speak it as the first language. Large numbers of speakers of Bantu languages and English-speaking South Africans also speak it as the second language. It is taught in schools, with about 10.3 million second-language students. One reason for the expansion of Afrikaans is its development in the public realm. It is used in newspapers, radio programs, TV, and several translations of the Bible have been published since the first one was completed in 1933. In neighboring Namibia, Afrikaans is widely spoken as a second language and used as lingua franca, while as a native language it is spoken in 11% of households, mainly concentrated in the capital Windhoek and the southern regions of Hardap and Karas. It, along with German, was among the official languages of Namibia until the country became independent in 1990. 25% of the population of Windhoek spoke Afrikaans at home. Today, both Afrikaans and German survive as recognized regional language in the country, although only English has official status within the government. Estimates of the total number of Afrikaans speakers range between 15 and 23 million. History. Origin. The Afrikaans language arose in the Dutch Cape Colony, through a gradual divergence from European Dutch dialects. During the course of the 18th century, as early as the mid-18th century and as recently as the mid-20th century, Afrikaans was known in Standard Dutch as a kitchen language, lacking the prestige accorded, for example, even by the educational system in Africa. Languages spoken outside Africa. Other early epithets setting apart Kaap's-Hollands as putatively beneath official Dutch standards included Geradbraakt, Gebroken, Onbeschaafd Hollands, as well as Verkeerd Nederlands. An estimated 90 to 95% of Afrikaans vocabulary is ultimately of Dutch origin, and there are few lexical differences between the two languages. However, Afrikaans has a considerably more regular morphology, grammar, and spelling. There is a degree of mutual intelligibility between the two languages, particularly in written form. Afrikaans acquired some lexical and syntactical borrowings from other languages such as Malay, Khoisan languages, Portuguese, and of the Bantu languages, and Afrikaans has also been significantly influenced by South African English. Nevertheless, Dutch speakers are confronted with fewer non-cognates when listening to Afrikaans than the other way round. Mutual intelligibility thus tends to be asymmetrical, as it is easier for Dutch speakers to understand Afrikaans than for Afrikaans speakers to understand Dutch. In general, mutual intelligibility between Dutch and Afrikaans is better than between Dutch and Frisian or between Danish and Swedish. The South African poet-writer Britten Breitenbach, attempting to visualize the language distance for Anglophones, once remarked that the differences between Dutch and Afrikaans are comparable to those between the received pronunciation and Southern American English. Development. Beginning in about 1815, Afrikaans started to replace Malay as the language of instruction in Muslim schools in South Africa. Written with the Arabic alphabet, see Arabic Afrikaans. Later, Afrikaans, now written with the Latin alphabet, started to appear in newspapers and political and religious works in around 1850. In 1875, a group of Afrikaans speakers from the Cape formed the Genootschap Verenigde Afrikaners, and published a number of books in Afrikaans, including grammars, dictionaries, religious materials and histories. In 1925, Afrikaans was recognized by the South African government as a real language, rather than simply a slang version of Dutch proper. Recognition. Afrikaans was considered a Dutch dialect in South Africa until the early 20th century, when it became recognized as a distinct language under South African law, alongside Standard Dutch, which it eventually replaced as an official language. A relative majority of the first settlers whose descendants today are the Afrikaners were from the United Provinces, though up to 1/6 of the community was also of French Huguenot origin, and a 1/7 from Germany. The workers and slaves who contributed to the development of Afrikaans were Asians and Malagasys, as well as the Khoi, San, and Bantu peoples who also lived in the area. African Creole people in the early 18th century, documented on the cases of Hendrik Babo and Patriarch Oude Ram, were the first to call themselves Afrikaner. Only much later, in the second half of the 19th century, did the Boers adopt this attribution too. The Khoi and mixed race groups became collectively referred to as Khalids. Monument. The Afrikaans language monument is located on a hill overlooking Paarl, Western Cape Province, South Africa. Officially opened on the 10th of October 1975. It commemorates the 50th anniversary of Afrikaans being declared an official language of South Africa in distinction to Dutch. It was erected in Paarl on the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Genootschap Verenigde Afrikaners, an organization which helped to strengthen Afrikaners' identity and pride in the language. Standardization. The linguist Paul Robesch suggested the earliest truly Afrikaans text, a doggerel verse from 1795 and a dialogue transcribed by a Dutch traveller in 1825. Printed material among the Afrikaners at first used only standard European Dutch. By the mid-19th century, more and more were appearing in Afrikaans, which was very much still regarded as a set of regional dialects. In 1861, L. H. Murant published his Zamenspraak tussen Klaaswaarzeger en Jan Twyfelaar, which is considered by some to be the first authoritative Afrikaans text. Abu Bakr Effendi also compiled his Arabic Afrikaans Islamic instruction book between 1862 and 1869, although this was only published and printed in 1877. The first Afrikaans grammars and dictionaries were published in 1875 by the Genootskap Verenigde Afrikaners in Cape Town. The First and Second Boer Wars further strengthened the position of Afrikaans. The official languages of the Union of South Africa were English and Dutch until Afrikaans was subsumed under Dutch on 5 May 1925. The main Afrikaans dictionary is the Woordeboek van die Afrikaanstaal, which is as yet incomplete owing to the scale of the project. But the one-volume dictionary in household use is the Verklarende Handwoordeboek van die Afrikaanstaal. The official orthography of Afrikaans is the Afrikaans Woordelies en Spelreëls, compiled by Data or Commissie. The Afrikaans Bible, a major landmark in the development of the language, was the translation of the whole Bible into Afrikaans. Before this, most Cape Dutch Afrikaans speakers had to rely on the Dutch Staten Bible. This Staten Vertaling had its origins with the Synod of Dordrecht of 1618 and was thus in an archaic form of Dutch. This was hard for Dutch and Cape Dutch speakers to understand, and increasingly unintelligible for Afrikaans speakers. C.P. Huishout, Arnoldus Panovis, and Stephanus Jacobus Dutoit were the first Afrikaans Bible translators. Important landmarks in the translation of the scriptures were in 1878 with C.P. Huishout's translation of the Evangelii Volgens Marcus. However, this translation was never published. The manuscript is to be found in the South African National Library, Cape Town. The first official translation of the entire Bible into Afrikaans was in 1933 by J.D. Dutoit, E. van Rooyen, J.D. Kestel, H.C.M. Fourie, and B.It. This monumental work established Afrikaans as Ensweer en ordentlik taal, that is, a pure and proper language for religious purposes, especially amongst the deeply Calvinist Afrikaans religious community that previously had been rather skeptical of a Bible translation that varied. For the Dutch version that they were used to, in 1983 a fresh translation marked the 50th anniversary of the 1933 version and provided a much-needed revision. The final editing of this edition was done by E. P. Grainwald, A. H. van Zyl, P. Verhoef, J. L. Hilberg and W. Kempen. Geographic distribution. Sociolinguistics. Some state that instead of Afrikaners, which refers to an ethnic group, the terms Afrikaanses or Afrikaanssprekenders should be used for people of any ethnic origin who speak Afrikaans. Linguistic identity has not yet established which terms shall prevail, and all three are used in common parlance. The white Afrikaans-speaking community started being referred to colloquially as the Boer. The terms Boersean and Boer Mac became popular among young white Afrikaners for expressing national pride, whether or not they actually grew up on a farm. Afrikaans is also widely spoken in Namibia. Before independence, Afrikaans had equal status with German as an official language. Since independence in 1990, Afrikaans has had constitutional recognition as a national, but not official, language. There is a much smaller number of Afrikaans speakers among Zimbabwe's white minority, as most have left the country since 1980. Afrikaans was also a medium of instruction for schools in Botswana, Bantustan. Many South Africans living and working in Belgium, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, Republic of Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the United States and Kuwait are also Afrikaans-speaking. They have access to Afrikaans websites, news sites such as Netwerk24.com and Sake24, and radio broadcasts over the web, such as those from Radio Sonder Grens and Radio Pretoria. Afrikaans has been influential in the development of South African English. Many Afrikaans loanwords have found the way into South African English, such as bakkie, ry, not g, takkies. A few words in Standard English are derived from Afrikaans, such as aardvark, trek, spoor, vel, commando from Afrikaans commando meaning small fighting unit, Boomslang and Apartheid. In 1976, secondary school pupils in Soweto began a rebellion in response to the government's decision that Afrikaans be used as the language of instruction. Half the subjects taught in non-white schools. Although English is the mother tongue of only 8.2% of the population, it is the language most widely understood, and the second language of a majority of South Africans. Afrikaans is more widely spoken than English in the Northern and Western Cape provinces, several hundred kilometers from Soweto. The black community's opposition to Afrikaans and preference for continuing English instruction was underlined when the government rescinded the policy 1 month after the uprising. 96% of black schools chose English as the language of instruction. Also, due to Afrikaans being viewed as the language of the white oppressor by some, pressure has been increased to remove Afrikaans as a teaching language in South African universities, resulting in bloody student protests in 2015. Under South Africa's Constitution of 1996, Afrikaans remains an official language, and has equal status to English and 9 other languages. The new policy means that the use of Afrikaans is now often reduced in favor of English, or to accommodate the other official languages. In 1996, for example, the South African Broadcasting Corporation reduced the amount of television airtime in Afrikaans, while South African Airways dropped its Afrikaans name Suid-Afrikaans Lugdiens from its livery. Similarly, South Africa's diplomatic missions overseas now only display the name of the country in English and the host country's language, and not in Afrikaans. In spite of these moves, the language has remained strong, and Afrikaans newspapers and magazines continue to have large circulation figures. Indeed, the Afrikaans language general interest family magazine Huish Genude has the largest readership of any magazine in the country. In addition, a pay TV channel in Afrikaans called Kynet was launched in 1999, and an Afrikaans music channel, MK, in 2005. A large number of Afrikaans books are still published every year, mainly by the publishers Human and Amp Russo, Tafelberg Uitgewers, Strook, and Protea Berkhuis. The Afrikaans film trilogy Backgate caused a reawakening of the Afrikaans film industry, and Belgian-born singer Karen Zoid's debut single Afrikaners is Pleasierig caused a resurgence in the Afrikaans music industry as well as gave rise to the Afrikaans rock genre. Afrikaans has 2 monuments erected in its honor. The first was erected in Burgersdorp, South Africa, in 1893, and the second, nowadays better-known Afrikaans language monument was built in Paarl, South Africa, in 1975. When the British design magazine Wallpaper described Afrikaans as one of the world's ugliest languages in its September 2005 article about the monument, South African billionaire Johan Rupert responded by withdrawing advertising for brands such as Cartier, Van Cleef & Amp, Apples, Mont Blanc and Alfred Dunhill from the magazine. The author of the article, Bronwyn Davies, was an English-speaking South African. Modern Dutch and Afrikaans share over 90% of the vocabulary. Afrikaans speakers are able to learn Dutch within a comparatively short time. Native Dutch speakers pick up written Afrikaans even more quickly due to its simplified grammar, whereas understanding spoken Afrikaans might need more effort. Afrikaans speakers can learn Dutch pronunciation with little training. This has enabled Dutch and Belgian companies to outsource the call center operations to South Africa. Current status. Post-apartheid South Africa has seen a loss of preferential treatment by the government for Afrikaans, in terms of education, social events, media, and general status throughout the country, given that it now shares its place as official language with 10 other languages. Nevertheless, Afrikaans remains more prevalent in the media, radio, newspapers and television, than any of the other official languages, except English. More than 300 book titles in Afrikaans are published annually. South African census figures suggest a growing number of speakers in all 9 provinces, a total of 6.85 million in 2011 compared to 5.98 million a decade earlier. The South African Institute of Race Relations projects that a growing majority will be colored Afrikaans speakers. Afrikaans speakers experience higher employment rates than other South African language groups, though 500,000 remain unemployed. Despite the challenges of demotion and emigration that it faces in South Africa, the Afrikaans vernacular remains competitive, being popular in DStv pay channels and several internet sites, while generating high newspaper and music CD sales. A resurgence in Afrikaans popular music since the late 1990s has invigorated the language, especially among a younger generation of South Africans. A recent trend is the increased availability of preschool educational CDs and DVDs. Such media also prove popular with the extensive Afrikaans-speaking expatriate communities who seek to retain language proficiency in a household context. After years of slumber, Afrikaans language cinema is showing signs of new vigor. The 2007 film Almoche Slimkind, the first full-length Afrikaans movie since Pulges of 1998, is seen as the dawn of a new era in Afrikaans cinema. Several short films have been created and more feature-length movies, such as Pina is Koning and Backgate, have been produced. Besides the 2011 Afrikaans language film Schoonheid, which was the first Afrikaans film to screen at the Cannes Film Festival, the film Platteland was also released in 2011. The Afrikaans film industry started gaining international recognition via the likes of big Afrikaans Hollywood film stars, like Charlize Theron and Charles Copley, promoting the mother tongue. Afrikaans seems to be returning to the SABC. SABC3 announced early in 2009 that it would increase Afrikaans programming due to the growing Afrikaans language market and need for working capital, as Afrikaans advertising is the only advertising that sells in the current South African television market. In April 2009, SABC3 started screening several Afrikaans language programs. Further latent support for the language derives from its depoliticized image in the eyes of younger generation South Africans, who less and less often view it as the language of the oppressor. Indeed, there is a groundswell movement within Afrikaans to be inclusive and to promote itself along with the other indigenous official languages. In Namibia, the percentage of Afrikaans speakers declined from 11.4% to 10.4%. The major concentrations are in Hardap Karis, Orongo, Khomas, Omaheki, Otjos and Yupa, Kunena, and Oshikoto. Dialects. Following early dialectical studies of Afrikaans, it was theorized that 3 main historical dialects probably existed after the Great Trek in the 1830s. These dialects of the Northern Cape, Western Cape, and Eastern Cape dialects. Northern Cape dialect may have resulted from contact between Dutch settlers and the Khoi people between the Great Karoo and the Kunena, and Eastern Cape dialect between the Dutch and the Xhosa. Remnants of these dialects still remain in present-day Afrikaans, although the standardizing effect of Standard Afrikaans has contributed to a great leveling of differences in modern times. There is also a prison cant, known as Sobler Asambler, which is based on Afrikaans, yet heavily influenced by Zulu. This language is used as a secret language in prison and is taught to initiates. Kaapse Afrikaans. The term Kaapse Afrikaans is sometimes erroneously used to refer to the entire Western Cape dialect. It is more commonly used for a particular sociolect spoken in the Cape Peninsula of South Africa. Kaapse Afrikaans was once spoken by all population groups. However, it became increasingly restricted to the Cape-colored ethnic group in Cape Town and environs. Kaapse Afrikaans preserves some features more similar to Dutch than to Afrikaans. The first-person singular pronoun ik as in Dutch as opposed to Afrikaans ek. The diminutive endings tje pronounced as in Dutch and not as ki as in Afrikaans. The use of the form seg, cf. Dutch zeg as opposed to Afrikaans she. Kaapse Afrikaans has some other features not typically found in Afrikaans. The pronunciation of j, normally j, as in Dutch, is often a dz. This is the strongest feature of Kaapse Afrikaans. The insertion of j after per second t and k when followed by e, g, kjn as opposed to Afrikaans ken. Kaapse Afrikaans is also characterized by much code switching between English and Afrikaans, especially in the inner city and lower socio-economic status areas of Cape Town. An example of characteristic Kaapse Afrikaans, Orange Rivière Afrikaans. The term Orange Rivière Afrikaans is sometimes erroneously used to refer to the Northern Cape dialect. It is more commonly used for the regional peculiarities of Standard Afrikaans spoken in the Uppington, Orange River Wine district of South Africa. Some of the characteristics of Orange Rivière Afrikaans are the plural form God, variant pronunciations such as in Kajak and Geld and the ending she, which indicates possession. Expatriate dialect. Although Afrikaans is mainly spoken in South Africa and Namibia, smaller Afrikaans-speaking populations live in Argentina, Australia, Botswana, Brazil, Canada, Lesotho, Malawi, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Swaziland, the UAE, the United Kingdom, Republic of Ireland, the USA, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. Most Afrikaans-speaking people living outside Africa are emigrants and the descendants. Because of emigration and migrant labor, more than 100,000 Afrikaans speakers may live in the United Kingdom. Grammar. In Afrikaans grammar, there is no distinction between the infinitive and present forms of verbs, with the exception of the verbs to be and to have. In addition, verbs do not conjugate differently depending on the subject. For example, only a handful of Afrikaans verbs have a preterite, namely the auxiliary wees, the modal verbs, and the verb ding. The preterite of mag is rare in contemporary Afrikaans. All other verbs use the perfect tense for the past. Therefore, there is no distinction in Afrikaans between I drank and I have drunk. When telling a longer story, Afrikaans speakers usually avoid the perfect and simply use the present tense, or historical present tense instead. A particular feature of Afrikaans is its use of the double negative. It is classified in Afrikaans as ontkennende vormen as something that is absent from the other West Germanic standard languages. For example, Afrikaans, hy kan nie Afrikaans praat nie, Dutch, hij spreekt geen Afrikaans, hij kan geen Afrikaans praten, English, he speaks no Afrikaans, he cannot speak Afrikaans, he can't speak Afrikaans, German, spricht kein Afrikaans, French, il ne parle pas Afrikaans. Both French and San origins have been suggested for double negation in Afrikaans, while double negation is still found in Low Franconian dialects in West Flanders and in some isolated villages in the center of the Netherlands. It takes a different form, which is not found in Afrikaans. The following is an example. Compare with ek wil nie doen nie, which changes the meaning to I want not to do this, whereas ek wil nie doen nie emphasizes a lack of want to act. Ek wil nie doen nie emphasizes the act itself. The nie was the Middle Dutch way to negate, but it has been suggested that since nie became highly non-voiced, nie or niet was needed to complement the nie. With time the nie disappeared in most Dutch dialects. The double negative construction has been fully grammaticalized in standard Afrikaans, and its proper use follows a set of fairly complex rules as the examples below show. The Dutch word het does not correspond to het in Afrikaans. The Dutch words corresponding to Afrikaans het heb, heeft and hebben. A notable exception to this is the use of the negating grammar form that coincides with negating the English present participle. In this case there is only a single negation. Certain words in Afrikaans arise due to grammar. For example, moenie, which literally means must not, usually becomes monia, although one does not have to write or say it like this. Virtually all Afrikaans speakers will change the two words to monia in the same way as do not shifts to don't in English.